Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 17 of Tour of Japan, the review series of course for the JGTC cars of GT6's lineup, both GT300 and 500 class. In this episode we're featuring a GT300 model, and this is the second of the two Impreza Super GT cars that are on the game. We have of course already reviewed the 2003 non-premium Spec Impreza. This though is the 2008 shape premium model, so of course it has the fully detailed interior, working headlights, windscreen wipers, etc. Now this right off the bat is a more expensive car than the 2003 model. The specs are greater, not a massive jump over the 2003, but they are nevertheless higher in pretty much every way. It costs 200 grand more though than the 2003 machine, and is it really worth that? Well, first things first, being a premium, you do of course get the fully detailed interior, and I know for a lot of people that alone would make it worth the extra money. Personally, not so much for me because I don't use cockpit cam that much, but I can understand why that would make a massive difference for people who do, because obviously staring at a nondescript black interior isn't really that exciting. But what about actual performance? Well, both cars of course have the Subaru 2-litre boxer engine. This one though can be tuned up to 633 horsepower and a pretty decent 518 pound-feet of torque, which interestingly means that it has more horsepower than the non-premium model, but actually less torque. Now, it weighs 1100 kilos, which is exactly the same as the non-premium model, and the PP is slightly higher at 609 compared to the older model's 602. This model also has a superior power to weight ratio of 575 horsepower per tonne, which is around 30 horsepower higher per tonne than the non-premium model. Now, in terms of actual performance, they're actually more different than you might expect, and I'm not talking lap times. The lap times are certainly different, but that's not the primary way that I'm talking about. The real difference between the two is that this is one of the very few GT300 or GT500 cars, but especially GT300s, to have all-wheel drive. Now, all-wheel drive of course has its disadvantages, just like everything does, such as understeer, but the handling signature that the all-wheel drive gives this car is almost completely unique in the Super GT category on Gran Turismo 6, because unlike with any other Super GT machine on the game, or pretty much any other, you can just give this car full throttle out of corners and not experience any wheel spin at all. It will never flick its tail out, it just doesn't. It's got so much grip, and as such, although by professional drivers' standards those kind of guys may not like it so much, faster drivers tend to prefer rear-wheel drive because it's more of a challenge to get the best out of it, and also because your turn-in is generally better. However, for less experienced drivers, especially beginners, this car's really perfect, to be honest, because the all-wheel drive is so forgiving that it's almost impossible to dump the car in a corner, because although of course you could just drive into the wall if you don't use your brakes, but within reason this car is extremely forgiving. Like I said, no wheel spin at all, it never steps the tail out, it does exactly what you want it to do when you want it to do it. And interestingly as well, it's one of the very few four-door body style Super GT machines, and as such that also gives it considerably different weight balancing to many of the other Super GT class cars, which tend to be based on more sports or at least high performance versions of coupes. This car is of course a super saloon, or a sports saloon instead, which gives it more the handling of a touring car. I guess technically Super GT cars can be classed as touring cars, but it's kind of its own thing, and this car does handle more like a DTM machine or a BTCC car rather than pretty much any other Super GT car. So if you're looking for a car that's actually genuinely different, and not just slightly, completely different to drive than any other Super GT car, that's this car. And even though it is more expensive than the non-premium model, I would say it is actually worth the extra money, because it's still far cheaper than most of the GT500 machines, if not all of them, and it actually has the sheer horsepower to keep up with those kinds of vehicles. 633 horsepower means your top speed is around the 200 mph region, so it's pretty good on high-speed tracks as well. So overall, for $500,000 credits, it's an interesting alternative, especially with the all-wheel drive to some of the other JGTC models. And if you haven't tried out this particular premium Impreza before, I would actually suggest that you give it a go, because it's completely different to any of the other cars we've reviewed so far. So that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.